Hi there. So here I am working on the Zinnia tee. I have already finished the front panel and I am now working on the second back panel. You can see here that I've done one full repeat of that patterning and I am now working on my second repeat of row 1 of the pattern. And I thought I would just go ahead and show real quickly how I work that yarn over, slip, knit, pass over for row 1. So in order to work a yarn over, I bring my yarn up to the front. Since I'm knitting stitches, this is putting my working yarn on the opposite side of my work that I would normally have it while knitting. With my working yarn up front here, I am going to slip the next stitch without knitting it. I'm going to then knit the following stitch. You can see that my working yarn comes up over the needle, creating that yarn over. Now the self-striping nature of this yarn means that the stitch that I slipped is actually a different color than the other two stitches, which is kind of nice. Just makes it a little clearer which one I need to grab and pass over the stitch that I just knit. So you can see there that I have the yarn over stitch, I have the knit, and you can see down here the stitch that was passed over. I'll do that one more time. Bring the yarn up to the front. Slip as if to knit, but don't knit it. Knit into the following stitch. Pass that slip stitch over. And that's all there is to that. And we're just going to do that all the way across row 1. That will then be followed by purling for several rows until we get to row 9, which is a yarn over, knit 2 together row that I will demonstrate when we get to that. All right, once again working on the Zinnia tee. I'm going to demonstrate how to do the yarn over, knit 2 together. So first 2 stitches, of course, are just knit. And then to do the yarn over, I just bring the working yarn up to the front instead of the back. Pull up the next 2 stitches here. And knit 2 together. Again, I bring the yarn forward. Knit the following 2 stitches together. You can see the yarn come up and over the needle to form the yarn over. Yarn forward and knit 2 together. Yarn forward, knit 2 together. And you're just going to do that across the whole row. And the next step I show will be blocking out and starting to measure out to seam it together. Okay, so I thought I'd give a quick demo on how I go about blocking this sweater when I'm finished knitting each side. On the right here, you can see an unblocked part along with some blocking wires that I have there. And over here is the side that I blocked. And let's grab the camera and I'll show you up close what I mean here. So I've used some of these blocking wires, which are just these metal wires here, to go ahead and thread through all 4 sides of the sweater panel and just stretched it out to the dimensions specified in the pattern. So it's about 27 inches wide because our finished sweater should be 54 inches around. And I stretched it a little bit more than 18 inches deep. So again, just showing you real quick the materials I used. I've got the blocking wires, and then I used some of these knit blockers, which are just combs with several different pins per comb to hold the wires in place. And then when this panel dries, it'll stay in roughly that shape. It might spring back a little bit, but overall it should be the size and shape that I want. And as I wait for it to dry, I'm going to go ahead and measure out where I am going to seam the shoulders as specified in the pattern. I believe it's 8 inches in from each side. And I'll mark that with a removable stitch marker and count those lace holes in so that I make sure that I go ahead and make them exactly symmetrical. Okay, and that's it. That's how I go about blocking. And that's just going to help me when I go to seam up the sides or seam the shoulders and then go ahead and knit those sleeve bands. Okay, so here I am with my nicely blocked front and back of my sweater. I have the wrong sides together, and on either side I have measured in 8 inches along the shoulder and just marked the 8-inch mark with a safety pin on each front and back. I also know that the 8-inch mark on each piece corresponds to 16 eyelet holes in from the edge. So in addition to making sure each side is measured 8 inches in from the side edge, I also counted in 16 eyelet holes to make sure everything stays perfectly lined up and that I'll be able to put this together so it's all nice and even. Now, when I was binding off, I actually left probably a good 2 to 3 feet of yarn when I finished binding off. And this was because I knew that I would have it at either end of my project and that I could then use that yarn to seam together the shoulders as opposed to having to get a new piece of yarn and weave in ends on both sides. So on the back here, I have my end, and then up here in the front, I have my front piece. And I thought I would just demonstrate really quickly how I go about seaming together. I've used a really oversized tapestry needle. I would probably go with one a little bit smaller than this normally, but in order to let you be able to see what it is I'm doing, I thought I would go with a larger one. So I've got my yarn. I'm going to go ahead and thread it. And then my tapestry needle. And the yarn's a little bit crimpy and wavy from when I was blocking it. So here I have it attached at the corner of that back edge where I finished binding off. And I'm going to go ahead and bring it right up through the edge of the front, just to attach those two together. I may need to cut this a bit shorter so that I'm not having to pull a big long strand through. So hopefully you'll be able to see this on camera. but I am going to go through, you can almost see where each pearl bump has a sort of a hole on either side. Here, I'll try to, it has a hole on either side that I can kind of go through as a natural point to try and seam through. So I pull it apart a little bit to try and visualize that. And up here, I have that V that is the bound off stitch. And I'm going to leave that as a full row that I don't touch, so that I have 2 strands, a full stitch, a full row of stitches that is encased in the seam. So I'm going to go under that pearl bump. Like I said, I have a lot to pull through here. I did not need to leave that much, but I tend to say better too much than not enough. And once again, you can kind of see the pearl bump on this side. Again, I'm going under that full cast off row, and I'm just going to pull my yarn through. Again, this is on the front. So again, going under a pearl bump on the back. Now I'm going to find the next one on the front. Make sure I don't get my fabric cut up in the seam there. And in this same way, I am just going to continue alternating, going under a stitch on the back and under a stitch on the front. Hopefully you can see that. So that I keep those nice and even. Every so often, as I get a little further in, I might take a look and make sure that I'm lining up those eyelets perfectly. Like right now, I've gone through this stitch that is just to the right of my second eyelet. And when I look up here, I can trace that stitch down. And again, I'm just to the right-hand side of the second eyelet on my back. I'm just going to make sure that I continue like that. Get everything all neat and even so that my finished product looks really nice. Again, under a stitch on the front. You can also see that that seam is a really neat, tidy seam. I just kind of snug it up as I go. I don't want it to be so tight that it ruches that edge, but I want it to be tight enough that it's not going to pull apart. And if you have your yarn as long as mine, it can sometimes get a bit tangly as you're trying to pull it through. So when I stop the camera, I will cut this a bit shorter to finish seaming the entire thing. So in this same manner, I'm going to continue all the way down until my 2 safety pins, until I'm seamed all the way to those 2 safety pins, and also 16 eyelets in from the side edge. And then I will repeat the same thing on the other side, going in the opposite direction. I like to work, generally speaking, from right to left while I'm seaming. So on this, I will turn the back so that it's facing me, and the front facing away from me, so that I can again seam from right to left. And that way both shoulder seams should look exactly the same and be perfectly even. And then we will work on picking up those edges for the sleeve band. So here we are. I have gone ahead and seamed up the shoulders on either side, leaving the boat neckline here. I'll give you a quick peek at what those seams look like on the inside. As you can see, seaming it like that gives a nice flat, minimal seam that should lay really nicely inside the garment. So then, now on the side edge, I have measured 6 inches down on either side of that shoulder seam, and marked again with just some safety pins, so that I will know where I am picking up for the sleeve band. I've already made the sleeve band on this side. You can see I did 4 repeats of that sort of twisted rib pattern indicated in the pattern. And then I left again a very long tail because I am then going to thread that on my tapestry needle and use it to seam both the armband closed and all down the side of the garment when I'm finishing it. So I thought I'd give you a little peek about picking up stitches on the side. You can see here that there's a little bit of a blip in the fabric, but that should hide just fine when I go to pick up those stitches. So I've got my size 3 needle. I went ahead and just went with a 24-inch needle. You don't need much. Obviously you're only making about a 12-inch wide band. For this size, it says to pick up 70 stitches total. So I want to make sure that I'm picking up 35 on one side of the shoulder seam and then another 35 on the other, ending at that safety pin. So for me, picking up isn't always an exact science. Thankfully, 35 to that seam is not a huge number. I'm just going to demonstrate how I go about that a little bit. Here, I'll bring the camera down a bit. All right. So on either side of the shoulder seam, 6 inches corresponded to 5 rows of eyelet holes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I just went with the middle garter ridge in between the 5th and 6th eyelet holes, rows. So that's where I have marked my 6 inches, and I'm just taking some yarn. I'm going to go right in. I'm going right in under that first column, so you can see that I have 2 strands on my needle that I'm coming under in order to pick up those stitches. Where's my end? All right. So I'm gonna leave a decent tail, but not too much of one when I go to pick up. Enough that I can be assured that I'm not gonna pull through. So I'm gonna pick up that first stitch, go ahead and remove the safety pin to get it out of my way. And then keep finding those holes in behind that column. Sometimes it's a little tricky to find them, especially with the camera in front of me. And I just want to pick up behind that one selvage column. Just like so. Now, obviously I'll do 35 stitches on up there. If I wind up with too few or too many, then I'll just tear it out and come back and pick up again, making sure that I make it to 35 before I get to that seam. I'll show you what that looks like on the reverse side, on the side I've already done. You can see just doing that one row, as long as I know I'm picking up behind one column of stitches, I know that it's going to be even on my right side. It's not going to zigzag around, and it's just going to make a nice, again, slight minimal seam on the wrong side, so everything should lay nicely. When I finish, I might steam block this armband a little bit just to get it to relax. I might also wet block when I have completely sewn up the garment, and just let it dry flat. Okay, the next time I turn the camera on, it will probably be with a finished garment. So here is the finished top. I think it turned out pretty well. Nice, easy, boxy style. Colorful, fun. It's got this nice little mock cable detail on the ribbing for the sleeve. And that's it. Thanks for watching.